Okay, so I've construed anomaly as normal or revolutionary using Thomas Kuhn's terms. And a normal bit of anomaly is one that you can deal with without blowing the framework within which you're working. And so, and I hope everyone understands this. I know I've gone over it a couple of times, but it's a very critical issue. Does it make sense that the anomaly is normal if it only disrupts subsidiary elements of the plan? Is everyone clear about what that means? Yes?
There could be a spectrum, right? Or are you saying, like, if it's disrupting anything more than the actual current action, then it's revolutionary? Or is there a spectrum?
There's a spectrum because there's a hierarchy. And we'll look at the hierarchy again, but the idea is that the stress of the anomaly is proportionate to its position in the hierarchy of plans. The most stressful anomaly blows out your top level plan. That's a near-death experience. It means everything that you hold, that would be what would happen if the economy collapsed and your family was killed in a car accident and your partner left you on the same day. It would be something like that. It's like the bottom drops out of absolutely everything. You know, and that does happen to people now and then. And we know what happens to people in situations like that, depending on their level of resiliency, because that is another issue. But one of the most common precipitants of severe depression is unemployment. You know, and you might say, well, is that psychological? It's like, no, I would say, not really. There's a psychological element in that you might not be as well prepared for a bout of unemployment as you could conceivably be. But if I have someone as a client who's depressed and unemployed, what I try to do is treat the unemployment, not the depression, because what the hell are they going to do? You know, how can you not be depressed when you're looking at a world of narrowing opportunities followed by losing your house and ending up on the street? It's like it's not exactly a psychological problem.
So when you talk about being psychologically prepared, do you mean having like more subordinate frames that are construed so that you can limit how many frames or at what levels?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things is it's like being able to move on your feet. So let's say you want to have the first question is, can you have a meaningful life, right? Because we're going to start from the proposition that unvarnished life is very dismal and dreadful, right? So if you're not prepared for it, it'll just grind you up, and that will be very painful. Okay, so we're going to use that as a baseline. The baseline isn't that you're going to be secure and happy. The baseline is there isn't much of you, you're very fragile, and things will grind you into nothing. That's a Buddhist stance, right? Because the Buddhists say, first dictum of Buddhism is life is suffering. The first dictum isn't that life is happy. So the Buddhists basically say chaos is the normative condition. Okay, so fine. So how do you do that? How do you deal with that? It's not how you fight against it or defend against it. I don't think those are appropriate conceptualizations. It's not positive illusions, it's not defense mechanisms, it's none of that, although you may also use that. What it is, do you have an intimate relationship that works? Do you have a family that's networked well together and strong? Do you have some sort of interesting occupation that regularizes your schedule, gives you something productive to do on a long-term basis, is stable and productive, right? Do you have something that you find engaging to do, or maybe more than one thing outside of work, right? And are you compromising your mental and physical health by doing any things that are particularly stupid? And, you know, one of those the top one of those I would say is probably alcoholism. So if there's one thing you really want to avoid that screws up your life, it's drinking too much. It is unbelievably dangerous. So the first thing we might say is, well, let's optimize those. Well, the more you optimize those, the more pillars there are in your plan, and they're only somewhat correlated. So maybe you can lose one, or maybe you can even lose two. It's going to knock you down, but it's not going to sink you. You know, and then you might also want to have variance on those plans to some degree. So like one of the things I mentioned earlier is that it's always nice to have an alternative to your current job at hand, because it stops you from being vulnerable. It also stops you from being a slave or a victim, or maybe even stops you from being a tyrant, because you've got some choice. So you diversify your hierarchy of plans, essentially. Just like you do, you can think about it as stock market investing in some sense. It's a very analogous idea. You don't put all your eggs in the same basket. You diversify across multiple portfolios. So if one sector gets knocked out, hopefully it doesn't knock you completely out of the game. And that's partly what I guide you through in the future authoring program too, because it asks you to consider what I think are the main 6 dimensions of your life. You know, and so one of the things I do when a client comes is I just do a rough walkthrough of those dimensions. It's like, does anybody care if you're alive or dead? You know, so do you have any friends? Do you have anybody that loves you? Do you have an intimate relationship? How are things going with your family? Do you have a job? Are you as educated as you are intelligent? Do you have any room for advancement in the future? Do you do anything interesting outside of your job? And if the answer to all those is no, it's like, you're not depressed, my friend. You just are screwed. Really, it's like, if someone comes to me and they're 40 and that's the issue, especially if they're also drinking, it's like Humpty Dumpty has hit the floor and no one is going to put the pieces together because it's too much. It's too much. People, you know what I mean? It takes a whole lifetime to put those things together. And that might have started as a psychological problem. But by the time it's fully manifest and you're 40, that's not a psychological problem. It's just a complete catastrophe.
Someone in that situation at 40, what is the best thing for them to do?
Well, I think sometimes antidepressants help. And the reason they help is because they actually buffer the stress response. So, you know, you're being ground down by the world. Because essentially what you are is you're not even in the dominance hierarchy. You're so low in the dominance hierarchy that you're not even in it, right? You're an outcast, fundamentally. So maybe buffering the stress response will help the person just not die from that. And then you start with one thing. You know, it's like you lay out the potential areas for improvement on the table, and you say, well, can we think of some small steps that you might take in one or more of those domains to start putting something solid underneath your feet? But what happens, I think, is that as you lose those pillars, the way that problems manifest themselves in your life becomes networked. And so you might make progress here, but some other catastrophe that's looming over here is going to knock you down. You know, so, yeah.